Pull almost any can of tuna off a grocery shelf and the label makes exactly one promise. This is tuna, packed in oil or water, ready to open. Independent DNA testing on cans pulled from ordinary supermarket shelves, not obscure imports, the same cans sitting in a normal cart, has repeatedly found that promise doesn't always hold up when someone actually checks. In some cases, what showed up in the lab wasn't tuna at all. It was escolar, a fish that both Japan and Italy refuse to let onto store shelves because of how severely it disagrees with the human digestive system. We're going through 7 of the most widely purchased canned tuna brands in America, covering everything from anonymous store brand sourcing to an actual federal criminal conviction, and only 2 of these 7 actually earned a clean bill of health once someone bothered to check what was really inside the can. One quick question before we get started: which tuna brand do you buy most often? Let us know in the comments. Let's get into it. Number 7. Market Pantry. This is Target's in-house label, the one that reads as a small step up from a generic discount store brand, simply because the retail environment around it feels more considered. Nicer lighting, cleaner shelving, a general sense that someone at corporate is paying closer attention. A shopper paying slightly more for Market Pantry over the cheapest option in a different store is making a reasonable assumption in that context, that the price gap reflects some kind of real quality difference somewhere back in the supply chain. It doesn't, at least not in any way that's actually documented or verifiable. Target doesn't own or operate any fishing vessels. It has no direct ties to specific named fishing operations, and it doesn't run its own processing plants. What Target does is design packaging and manage procurement contracts, and the tuna inside that specific can is whatever a winning supplier delivered for that particular contract cycle, a supplier that can, and does, change from one quarter to the next. Market Pantry tuna carries no named fishery anywhere on the packaging, no Marine Stewardship Council seal, and nothing in the way of independently disclosed species testing. The sourcing information printed on the can meets the bare legal minimum required to sell canned tuna in the United States. And as this investigation keeps demonstrating brand after brand, that legal minimum tells a shopper almost nothing meaningful about what species actually ended up inside. Comparisons of private label tuna sold across large American chains have repeatedly turned up more mislabeled species than researchers find in name brand products. A gap that makes sense once you realize nobody outside the supply chain is actually checking. So the risk stacks up at every point. The product changes hands. On its way to a shelf, the price premium over the absolute cheapest option on the shelf didn't buy any real supply chain accountability. It bought a cleaner looking label and a slightly nicer font, produced by a design team rather than a fishery. Number 6. Great value, Walmart. This is the budget option, the one families reach for specifically because tuna is already one of the more affordable proteins on the shelf, and a household stretching a weekly grocery budget has every reason to reach for the cheapest reliable option available. None of that reasoning is the problem here. The actual issue is what sits behind the Walmart name once you actually trace the supply chain, instead of just trusting the price tag. Walmart is the biggest retail company on earth by revenue, and none of that scale translates into owning fishing boats or employing people whose job is verifying species before A can get sealed. What it has instead are supply contracts, and those contracts go to whichever supplier can deliver product at the lowest possible cost per unit while still technically clearing the minimum legal bar for selling canned tuna in America. That bar sits low to the ground. No name fisheries required anywhere on the label, no independent species testing mandated, no mercury disclosure beyond the baseline the FDA already requires of the entire category regardless of retailer. Here's the detail most shoppers never think to ask about: the manufacturer actually producing great value tuna. This quarter may not be the same manufacturer producing it next quarter. The underlying contract simply rotates to whoever wins on price at that moment. The sourcing and processing facilities shift right along with it, and the label sitting on the shelf never changes even slightly to reflect any of that movement happening behind it. Genetic testing on store-brand tuna keeps turning up mislabeling rates that rank among the worst anywhere in the canned tuna business, and the underlying economics explain exactly why. Named fisheries and above minimum mercury testing both cost real money, and every one of those costs works against winning a contract built entirely around lowest price. Number 5. Geneva. This is the premium-looking one on this list, positioned slightly above everything else on the shelf both in price and in presentation. Packaged in a can specifically designed to imply it came from somewhere more considered, more careful, than the rest of the aisle around it. The Italian name does genuine psychological work the instant you spot it. It conjures a Mediterranean coastline, and combined with olive oil packing and a noticeably higher price tag, it builds an entire narrative before the can is ever opened. Artisan sourcing, old-world craftsmanship, a product worth the extra few dollars specifically because of where it seems to come from. That story is a carefully built aesthetic, not a sourcing guarantee. Geneva belongs to Bolton Food, an Italian corporation running large-scale global seafood processing operations. The Italian ownership itself is entirely real and easy to verify. What isn't supported by anything the brand actually discloses publicly is the further implication that the contents themselves reflect artisan Mediterranean fishing traditions, justifying that premium price tag. The tuna inside Geneva cans isn't exclusively Italian caught or Italian processed, and it moves through the same category of cost-driven global supply networks that most mass-market canned tuna relies on. Independent labs have repeatedly caught mismatches between labeled and actual species in premium olive oil-packed lines across this category, which means shoppers are paying extra for a level of verification the underlying supply chain simply isn't providing. There's a second layer of uncertainty sitting on top of the first. The specific quality and geographic origin of the olive oil itself is never actually disclosed anywhere on the label, and olive oil happens to be one of the single most extensively documented cases of food adulteration anywhere in the global food supply, with products sold and labeled simply as olive oil repeatedly found, through independent testing, to contain cheaper vegetable oil blends that never once appear on the printed ingredient list, which means a can of Geneva is potentially carrying two separately unverified ingredients rather than just the one everyone assumes to worry about, the fish and now the oil it's sitting in. That's 3 down, 4 to go. And from here, the problems stop being about opaque supply chains and start involving actual federal courtrooms, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation, and one brand whose single genuine safety promise ends up creating a blind spot nobody expected. Number 4. Bumblebee Foods. This is the point where the entire investigation stops being about ambiguous labeling and vague sourcing claims, and becomes an actual matter of federal criminal law, complete with a jury verdict and a prison sentence. A federal jury sat through weeks of testimony before convicting Bumblebee's former chief executive, Christopher Leshowski, in late 2019 on a single count tied to conspiring with rival executives at competing companies to fix canned tuna prices, not a settlement, not a deferred prosecution where a company simply writes a check and moves on, but a criminal jury verdict. The court determined the conspiracy had touched more than $600 million worth of tuna sales. Over the years it ran, and the presiding judge specifically noted that tuna is a basic food staple relied on by lower-income households, which factored directly into sentencing. Leshowski received a 40-month federal prison term along with a $100,000 personal fine. Bumblebee as a company separately pleaded guilty and paid its own $25 million criminal fine on top of that. The company itself filed for bankruptcy that same year, went through a restructuring under new private equity ownership, and came out the other side with refreshed branding, a more modern-looking website, and public commitments to sourcing transparency that read well in a press release. Here's a fair way to test whether any of that actually changed something that matters. Look at what's verifiably different about how the product gets sourced and independently verified, not at the new logo. Once the restructuring settled, though, Bumblebee's standard product line still didn't carry any independent third-party species verification. There was still no named fishery printed anywhere on the standard label, and there was still no traceable path a consumer could actually follow from a specific fishing ground all the way to a specific can sitting on a shelf. Independent testing conducted since the restructuring has continued to surface the same categories of concern: mercury inconsistencies across product lines and species, questions the company doesn't proactively address, which strongly suggests the underlying problem was never really about which individual happened to be running the company at any given moment. It was built directly into the structure of the supply chain itself, and a new CEO and a new logo were never going to fix that on their own. Number 3. Starkist. This is the brand fronted by Charlie, the cartoon tuna who spent decades scheming to sneak his way into a Starkist can, going back all the way to 1961, a mascot multiple generations of American families grew up watching on television, whose sheer familiarity alone has kept plenty of shoppers from ever seriously questioning the brand behind him. Generation after generation, what Charlie never once mentioned during any of those decades of advertising is that Starkist, working together with Bumblebee and Chicken of the Sea, was secretly coordinating prices behind closed doors for years at a stretch. Which specific can a shopper actually grabbed off the shelf never really mattered under that arrangement. The price had effectively already been agreed upon ahead of time by all 3 competitors in direct violation of federal antitrust law. Federal investigators spent years building a case that ultimately pushed Starkist into a guilty plea on price-fixing charges in 2019, resulting in the maximum criminal fine the statute actually allowed for this kind of offense: a full $100 million. That's the financial half of the problem. Separately, and unrelated to the price-fixing case entirely, marine conservation researchers running independent DNA panels have found Starkist cans labeled albacore that actually tested as skipjack once sequenced, along with cans labeled light tuna, holding material that gene sequencing couldn't even confirm was tuna of any species at all. On top of the DNA findings, certain Starkist varieties have tested above the FDA's own advisory thresholds for mercury in independent laboratory analysis. A genuinely meaningful concern, given that mercury doesn't simply pass through the body but accumulates over time, crosses the placental barrier during pregnancy, and directly interferes with neurological development in fetuses and young children. That happens to describe precisely the population that's leaned on Starkist for decades as an affordable, seemingly health-conscious source of protein for their families. Number 2. Chicken of the Sea. That mermaid logo has sat on the can since 1914, and for a large share of shoppers, seniors especially, along with families who've bought the same staples across generations, the brand stopped registering as an active choice a long time ago. It reads instead as a fixture, something so permanently familiar that it feels automatically safe. That feeling is, in a very real sense, the actual product being sold. Behind that friendly mermaid logo sits Thai Union, a massive conglomerate based in Thailand that commands somewhere around 1/5 of the entire global canned seafood market, a scale that dwarfs almost every other single company named in this investigation. Back in 2015, the Associated Press ran an investigative series exposing forced labor throughout Thailand's seafood supply chain. Men trafficked onto fishing boats and kept at sea for months or sometimes years, unpaid, with no contract and no way to get off the vessel. That series, published under the title Seafood from Slaves, went on to take home the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for Public Service and is widely credited with directly helping free upwards of 2,000 trafficked workers who'd been held against their will. Thai Union's own chief executive publicly confirmed at the time that the findings touched his company's own supply chain. specifically calling it a wake-up call for the industry and promising meaningful reform in response. Thai Union has since joined several international sustainability coalitions and made repeated public commitments to systemic change across its operations, but independent audits conducted in the years since that original reporting have continued to raise unresolved sourcing questions the company hasn't fully closed out. What actually happens aboard a fishing vessel 200 miles offshore, in the middle of the night, with no outside observer present, remains considerably harder for anyone to verify than whatever language appears in a polished corporate sustainability report. The sheer scale of Thai Union's operations works against easy verification too. Vessels and processing facilities spread across multiple countries mean more transfer points along the way, where species substitution can quietly occur before a fish ever reaches a sealed can. And the systems theoretically responsible for catching that kind of substitution are, in large part, the same systems the corporation itself owns, operates, and self-audits. That's 6 brands down, out of 7. And the final entry is genuinely the strangest one on this entire list. Not because it's objectively the worst on paper compared to a federal conviction, or a Pulitzer-winning slavery investigation, but because of the specific, unusual kind of problem it actually represents. Number 1. Safe Catch Elite. This is genuinely the hardest brand on the entire list to place at the very top of an avoid ranking, and it belongs here for a fundamentally different reason than any of the 6 brands already covered above it. Safe Catch built its entire brand identity around a single promise that no other major canned tuna company on the market was willing to make. Every individual fish gets tested for mercury before it ever goes into a can, rather than relying on a single batch sample pulled at random to represent the whole production run. The brand markets itself directly and specifically to pregnant women and cancer patients. 2 populations for whom mercury exposure isn't some abstract, long-term statistical risk sitting in a research paper, but an immediate, specific, and genuinely serious medical concern shaping real dietary decisions. That mercury testing claim is genuinely real, independently verifiable, and stands as arguably the single most meaningful consumer safety commitment offered anywhere in this entire product category. Nobody else covered anywhere in this investigation is even attempting that level of individual fish-by-fish testing before a can ever gets sealed shut. Safe Catch earns the top spot on this list for a completely different reason entirely, one that has nothing to do with fraud or federal charges. That health positioning has worked so effectively over time that a significant share of its customer base appears to have quietly stopped scrutinizing anything else printed on the label. A pregnant woman choosing Safe Catch specifically because she trusts that particular mercury commitment is absolutely making a reasonable decision on her own terms. But the trust tends to quietly extend across the entire rest of the product without any further scrutiny applied, on the understandable assumption that a brand this careful about one specific thing must logically be equally careful about everything else it sells. Sodium is precisely where that quiet, unexamined assumption starts to break down under closer inspection. Certain Safe Catch varieties run meaningfully higher in sodium than the brand's health-forward positioning would suggest, and for pregnant women managing blood pressure and fluid retention, or cancer patients dealing with treatment side effects that already include cardiovascular strain, sodium isn't a footnote. It's a primary concern. That sodium information is technically disclosed somewhere on the label, in compliance with the law. It simply isn't emphasized with anywhere near the prominence given to the mercury claim that actually drives the purchasing decision in the first place, and the brand's own marketing actively encourages frequent, regular consumption, specifically because the mercury testing supports doing so safely, all without ever directly addressing what that same regular frequency means for sodium intake in the exact populations most likely to be genuinely affected by it. That's the complete avoid list: 7 brands, 7 genuinely distinct and separately documented categories of problem, ranging from anonymous private label sourcing with essentially zero accountability behind it, all the way up to an actual federal criminal conviction carrying a real prison sentence. Now, here are the two brands that actually held up when put through that exact same level of scrutiny. Best pick number 2, Wild Planet. This brand wasn't built as a premium line extension bolted onto the side of an already existing seafood conglomerate, the way plenty of upgraded options in this category quietly are. It was built from the ground up specifically as a rejection of how the rest of this category operates. And that founding intention actually shows up in verifiable, checkable detail rather than living purely in marketing copy. Every single fish that goes into a Wild Planet comes in pole and line caught, a detail that carries considerably more weight than it might first seem to a casual shopper skimming the label. It's the most selective method commercial fishing has, pulling in one fish at a time rather than dragging a net that scoops up whatever else happens to be swimming nearby, which is exactly how unrelated species end up mixed into a can that was never supposed to contain them. It's meaningfully slower, more expensive, and far less scalable across large volumes than industrial net fishing, which is exactly why almost nothing else covered in this entire investigation actually uses it. The economics push every other brand toward the faster, cheaper method instead. The fisheries are named and the catch regions documented, creating an actual paper trail from a specific patch of ocean to the specific can in your hand. There's no added water inflating weight or artificially padding the protein number, no broth, no filler. The ingredient panel on Wild Planet Albacore reads simply, Albacore Tuna, Sea Salt. Species claims are backed by independent third-party DNA testing rather than the brand simply reporting on itself. Mercury results are both tested and openly disclosed. The can lining runs BPA-free across the entire product line, and the company reports 0 recalls across its entire operating history since being founded. It costs more than Starkist, more than Bumblebee, more than any of the store brands covered earlier in this list, and that added cost is directly the pole and line fishing method, the named and documented fisheries, and the independent testing that the rest of this category apparently decided wasn't worth the expense of actually doing. Best pick number 1, American Tuna. This brand delivers exactly what its straightforward name implies. No more and no less. Albacore caught off the U.S. Pacific coast by American fishing families who've worked those same waters for generations. Processed entirely domestically under U.S. regulatory oversight. From the moment the fish comes out of the water to the moment the can gets sealed. The supply chain here never touches Thai Union, never touches anything connected to the Bumblebee restructuring, and never routes through the kind of opaque, multi-country processing networks where species substitution becomes genuinely possible at every single handoff. It's arguably the simplest, most direct supply chain anywhere in the entire canned tuna category, and that simplicity is essentially the whole point of the brand's existence. Boats catch Pacific albacore in verified, specifically documented fishing grounds, and from there, the fish moves directly into processing without ever passing through the long chain of international brokers, transit warehouses, and third-party facilities, where accountability has a consistent tendency to quietly disappear somewhere along the way. Full traceability from a specific ocean region to a specific can is built into the business model itself because the model was designed around accountability rather than volume. The company remains family-owned, and it has never been acquired by a larger seafood conglomerate or folded into a private equity portfolio, where sourcing decisions ultimately get made by procurement teams, optimizing purely for quarterly margin. The actual people behind American Tuna have their own names and livelihoods directly tied to every single can that ships out under the brand. And that kind of personal accountability doesn't evaporate the way it clearly did for brands elsewhere on this list that went through a bankruptcy filing and a subsequent change of ownership. Independent verification consistently backs up what the label itself claims. Mercury levels test reliably within safe ranges batch after batch. Sodium content is honestly and accurately represented rather than downplayed, and the ingredient panel is short enough to read out loud in about 10 seconds flat. It isn't stocked on every ordinary grocery shelf the way something like Great Value or Starkist is. It's available primarily online and through specialty retailers, and it costs more per can than anything else covered in this entire investigation. That added cost is directly the domestic fishing fleet, the multi-generational family ownership structure, and a supply chain that genuinely begins and ends entirely within American waters, start to finish, with nothing routed through an overseas processing network along the way. 7 brands total, and only 2 of them actually earned everything printed on their labels once someone went and checked. The original reasoning that draws people toward canned tuna in the first place was never the problem. It's genuinely an accessible, shelf-stable source of protein and omega-3 fatty acids that pregnant women, athletes, people going through cancer treatment, and families working within a genuinely tight grocery budget have all relied on for decades, for entirely good reasons. That reasoning only actually holds up in practice when what's really inside the can matches what's printed on the label wrapped around the outside of it. Several of the most recognizable names in this entire category carry actual federal criminal convictions sitting on the public record. Another brand sits directly underneath a corporation tied to a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation into forced labor at sea, a connection its own CEO publicly confirmed rather than denied. Multiple brands across this list have been flagged through independent DNA testing for species substitution, which means the fish physically inside the can isn't reliably the same fish named on the label wrapped around it, and the private label brands sold under some of the most powerful, most trusted retail names in the entire country are running supply chains anonymous enough that essentially nobody, including the retailers actually selling them on their own shelves, can say with genuine confidence what species ended up in the specific. Concurrently sitting in your cart.